In this video, we're going to have a look at stitch markers, and we're going to compare standard stitch markers to what we call a continuous stitch marker, which is just where we use a piece of thread or a thinner piece of yarn to mark the start of each round. So first we're going to have a look at the continuous stitch marker. So I've got here my magic circle. That is the first round of my project that I've completed. So before I do the first stitch of the next round, I'm going to grab my stitch marker, my piece of thread, make sure that it's in a colour that contrasts well enough that you can see it. And I'm just going to lay it over my project from the front to the back. And it is going to go underneath my first stitch. So you can see that stitch marker going through my project underneath that first stitch there, marking the first stitch of round 2. Now I'm going to continue. I've now come to the end of my second round. So before I start round 3, I'm going to grab that stitch marking thread from the back of my project and bring it back to the front. So now I've got the original piece of thread going through my project, round the back and coming back over the top there. Then I'll do my first stitch for round 3. And you can see there that the stitch marker is coming through underneath that first stitch of round 3. So we continue that way, and I'll show you what it looks like once we're a decent way into our project as well. Now that I've made some good progress on my project, you can really start to see the benefits of this running stitch marker. So that's the end of my row there. So I take my stitch marker back over and continue again for that next stitch. But the beauty is that you can see where every single row starts, all the way back to the very start of the project. So what that means is that if I've made a mistake and I realize I've made a mistake 3 rows back, for example, I can frog 3 rows and get back exactly to the start of 3 rows back without having to figure anything out. There's absolutely no guesswork involved. You know where everything is up to. When you get to the end of your project, you've got your stitch marker running all the way up the joins of the rounds in your project. And all you do is grab one end and pull it straight out. If we have a look now at traditional stitch markers, you've got a couple of different designs, but essentially they're all like safety pins. So the way we use is we're going to do the first stitch of our next round, and then we're going to insert the stitch marker into that stitch. So there's my first stitch just here. I'm going to take my stitch marker and open it up, and I'm going to place it in through that stitch. So it's going through both parts of that, and then I can close it up. Now I'm going to continue crocheting this round until I get back to my stitch marker. Now that I've finished my second round, I need to open my stitch marker and remove it before I start round 3. So then I'm going to do the first stitch of round 3. And this is probably the bit that I struggle with the most, is remembering then to pick up my stitch marker and put it back into that stitch that I've just made. So that's now marking the first stitch of round 3. Now that we're partway through our project, we can see that using these sorts of stitch markers, if I was to realize that I've made a mistake somewhere further back in my project and I start taking out my stitch marker and frogging my work, then there's going to be no easy way to figure out or to keep track of where exactly I am in my project. You'll still be able to count rows, but you won't be able to tell whereabouts in that row you are without looking for things like increases and decreases. So that's another advantage of the continuous stitch marker.